The human soldier was summoned to the alien princess's wedding. Unaware, he was the groom. Liam Carter had seen his fair share of strange assignments in his career as a soldier, but nothing quite like this. The message had arrived in the middle of a quiet evening, a slip of paper that was delivered by a courier in the dead of night. It was an invitation, though nothing like the ones he'd ever seen before. It had no return address, no identifying markings. Just a single line of text. You are invited to attend the wedding of Princess Alara, heir to the Elandrian throne. The words were simple, yet they carried an air of mystery that sent a chill through him. The message also had an air of authority, something official, yet strange. He scanned the name again, Princess Alara. He had never heard of her, nor had he heard of the planet Elandria, which the letter mentioned as the wedding venue. Liam sat back in his chair, holding the invitation in his hands as his mind raced. He had been stationed at the farthest reaches of the galaxy for several years, stationed on a forgotten military base where duty was as routine as it could get. Yet this invitation, a formal, ornate piece of parchment that felt more like a relic from the past, suggested something far more exotic. A wedding? He had no connections to royalty, no reason to be invited to something like this. Why him? At first, he considered throwing the letter away. It could have been a mistake, or worse, a trap. But curiosity gnawed at him. He was no longer a young man filled with wild ambitions, but he was still a soldier who sought purpose. A wedding invitation from a princess wasn't exactly a typical letter. If anything, it was an opportunity to learn more about this mysterious event, perhaps even to use it to his advantage. The decision was made. Within hours, Liam was on a ship bound for Elandria. The travel was slow, taking several days as he crossed the vast expanse of space. He spent most of his time in solitude, staring out the window at the stars as they zipped past. As the distance from Earth grew, so did the feeling that he was walking into the unknown, where anything could happen. By the time the ship landed on the shimmering planet, Liam's nerves were on edge. Elandria was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The planet was a blend of natural beauty and cutting-edge technology. Towering cities gleamed with metallic towers that rose from the earth like massive sentinels. Yet the planet's landscapes were lush and vibrant, with forests of towering trees, crystal-clear rivers, and sprawling grasslands. Liam stepped off the transport and into a welcoming area where he was greeted by two figures in formal attire. Their faces were human, but their eyes, strangely gleaming with an otherworldly hue, gave away their alien nature. One was tall, with jet-black hair and sharp features. The other, slightly shorter, had a pale complexion that seemed almost ethereal, their eyes glowing a faint green as if reflecting the planet's lights. Both were dressed in intricate garments made of shimmering material that caught the sunlight in fascinating patterns. "Welcome, human soldier," the taller figure said. "We are pleased you've made it. Princess Alara awaits you." Liam gave a slight nod in acknowledgement, but inside, confusion churned. Princess Alara, the name echoed in his mind again. He had never been part of any royal circles, never part of any alliance that would warrant such an invitation. But here he was. The aliens led him through the grand palace gates, each step bringing him deeper into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The palace was a monumental structure, filled with ornate halls and grand chambers. It seemed like a mix of old-world aristocracy and futuristic technology. It felt cold and grand all at once, the type of place where nothing was left to chance. Liam was shown to his room, a lavish suite that had a sweeping view of the city below. The glass walls of the room provided an unobstructed view of the palace gardens, which were lined with flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Everything about this place felt unreal. He didn't have much time to settle in before he was summoned to the grand hall. He was told that the wedding would begin soon and that he was to attend as a special guest. He had no idea what role he would play in this royal affair, but as the time drew nearer, his curiosity grew. When he entered the grand hall, his breath caught in his throat. The sight before him was both overwhelming and awe-inspiring. The hall was vast, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch on forever. Long banners adorned the walls, each one emblazoned with the royal sigil of Elandria. The floor was made of polished white stone that gleamed under the soft light emitted from the floating orbs above. The guests had already gathered. Most of them were alien nobles, all of them dressed in exquisite robes and gowns that shimmered like precious metals. A hum of conversation filled the room, But the moment Liam entered, a sudden silence fell over the crowd. All eyes turned toward him. Liam's heart raced as he realized the attention was not just out of curiosity. The alien royalty regarded him with an air of reverence, almost as if he was a figure of great importance, someone they had been expecting for a long time. As he took his place among the other guests, a figure emerged from behind a set of curtains. It was the princess, Princess Alara. Liam had never seen someone so captivating. She stood tall, regal, and yet there was a vulnerability in her gaze that caught him off guard. Her features were sharp and exotic, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like liquid moonlight. Her eyes, though, were what drew him in, wide and shimmering like pools of starlight. She walked down the aisle, her presence commanding the room. She looked directly at him, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. It wasn't until the ceremony began that the full gravity of the situation hit Liam. The officiant, an older alien man, stepped forward, holding a gleaming scepter in his hands. He began speaking in a language that Liam didn't understand, but it didn't matter. It was the next words that truly stunned him. "Liam Carter, you stand here today as the groom for Princess Alara, heir to the Elandrian throne." The words hung in the air, the shock of it slicing through Liam like a blade. He froze. His mind raced, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. This was impossible. He wasn't here as a groom. He wasn't part of this wedding. There had to be some mistake. The officiant repeated the words, his tone more insistent this time. "No, no, this isn't right," Liam muttered under his breath, his hands balling into fists. The realization hit him harder than he expected. He had been summoned here as the groom. He had been brought to this alien world, not as a guest, but as the intended husband of a princess he had never met. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as a storm of emotions churned within him. Fear, anger, confusion, he felt them all crashing over him like a tidal wave. How could this happen? Why him? Princess Alara, standing beside him, seemed just as shocked. Her face, though calm, betrayed an underlying tension. She met his gaze, but there was no comfort in her expression, only uncertainty. Liam opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He was trapped in a situation he couldn't possibly have prepared for. The wedding had begun, and he was at the center of it all, unwittingly and unwillingly. The crowd waited for him to speak, for him to accept what had been decided for him. But in his mind, Liam knew one thing for certain: he needed answers. And he would get them, no matter the cost. Liam stood frozen, his mind scrambling to catch up with what was happening around him. The officiant's words echoed in his ears, but they didn't seem to make sense. He was the groom. To Princess Alara, there must have been some mistake. He had been invited here as a guest, nothing more. But now it seemed that his role had been preordained without his knowledge or consent. Around him, the guests remained silent, waiting for his response. The gazes of the alien nobles were intense, filled with expectation. The pressure mounted with every second, and Liam could feel the weight of their stares like a physical force. His hands clenched at his sides, and his chest tightened as he struggled to make sense of the situation. He turned his gaze to Alara, who stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "Princess Alara," the officiant said again, his voice commanding the room. "Will you take this man, Liam Carter, as your lawfully wedded husband?" Liam watched Alara closely. Her eyes were wide with shock, but there was no anger or fear in them, just an overwhelming sense of resignation. She didn't seem to be the one in control of this situation either. The ceremony had begun without either of them having any say in the matter. Liam opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. What was there to say? He had no idea what kind of game was being played here. Was this some sort of elaborate prank? A test of some kind? The more he thought about it, the more surreal the whole situation became. He caught a glimpse of the crowd's expectant faces, the murmurs that rippled through the guests. Some of them seemed to be waiting for him to speak up, to challenge the absurdity of the situation, while others were simply watching in silent amusement. Liam's gut twisted in a way he hadn't felt before. He wasn't just a guest at this event. He was part of it, whether he liked it or not. The officiant, noticing Liam's hesitation, smiled a thin, knowing smile. "This is your destiny, human soldier. Do not fight it." Liam's teeth ground together. His instincts as a soldier told him to fight back, to resist, but there was nowhere to turn. He was trapped in a situation beyond his control. The alien society here had clearly expected this to happen, and they weren't about to let him back out now. Finally, Alara spoke, her voice soft but steady. Yes, I will take him. Her words seemed to float in the air between them, heavy with meaning. It was clear that she, too, was caught in something far bigger than both of them. There was no joy in her response, no hope. Only a sense of duty and perhaps a deeper resignation to the reality she faced. She had no choice. Neither of them did. The officiant nodded, satisfied with the answer. He gestured to the attendants who had been waiting silently at the back of the hall. They moved quickly, bringing forward two ornate rings that glimmered with alien symbols. Liam barely noticed them, still struggling to comprehend how his life had taken such an unexpected turn. This wasn't just a royal wedding. It was something more, something far more significant, and he was right in the middle of it. As the rings were placed on his and Alara's fingers, a sense of finality settled in. This wasn't just some ceremony. This was real. He had just become bound to a princess from a foreign galaxy, and somehow it felt as if this moment would define the rest of his life. The crowd erupted into applause, and Liam felt his stomach churn. The room seemed to spin around him, the sounds of celebration feeling hollow and distant. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pushed into a life he hadn't chosen, and no matter how much he wanted to break free, there was no way out. As the ceremony concluded, the officiant gave his blessing, and the guests began to disperse. But instead of retreating into the background, as Liam had expected, Alara stayed by his side. Her expression had not softened. In fact, it looked even more strained now. Her eyes never left the ground, her shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing herself for something. She, too, was a prisoner of circumstance. "Come with me," she said quietly, her voice low enough that only Liam could hear. She didn't look at him as she spoke, but the command in her tone was unmistakable. It wasn't an order, but a plea, one he couldn't ignore. Liam followed her as she led him out of the grand hall and into the corridors of the palace. The walls here were made of smooth, polished stone, each step they took echoing down the empty passageways. The silence was heavy, the air thick with tension. Alara walked briskly, and Liam had no choice but to keep pace. Neither of them said a word until they reached a small, private chamber deep within the palace. The room was sparse, with only the essentials: furniture, a small table, and a few strange devices Liam didn't recognize. Alara moved to a nearby table, setting her hands on the surface. Her back was turned to Liam, and she took a deep breath before speaking. "This is a mistake," she said quietly, almost to herself. "None of this should have happened this way. I never wanted this marriage." Liam stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Then why did you agree?" "I didn't have a choice," she replied, her words tinged with frustration. "Neither of us does." Liam felt his anger rise again. "You don't have a choice, you're the princess." I could have what?" Alara interrupted, spinning around to face him. Her eyes flashed with something fierce, something raw. "I could have told my people no. I could have refused the union that has been planned for years, one that will ensure peace and stability for my people. You think I could have turned my back on that?" Liam stood in stunned silence, the words she spoke cutting through him like a blade. He hadn't considered the political forces at play. He had been so focused on his own confusion and anger that he hadn't thought about what Alara might be going through. This wasn't just a wedding to her, it was a lifeline for her kingdom, a burden she had been forced to carry for the sake of her people. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into a chair, looking defeated. "I never wanted any of this, but now I'm trapped just like you." Liam's anger faded, replaced by a growing sense of empathy. She was a princess, yes, but she was still a person caught in the middle of forces beyond her control. He had been dragged into this mess, but so had she. "Then what now?" Liam asked, his voice softer now, his anger giving way to a sense of uncertainty. Alara looked up at him, her eyes weary. "Now we try to survive it together." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Liam felt a flicker of understanding between them. They might have been forced into this situation, but they didn't have to be enemies. They were both players in a game neither of them wanted to play. But as the weight of the moment settled in, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that there was something even bigger at play, something neither he nor Alara fully understood. The wedding had been just the beginning. Whatever came next would change everything, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. Liam stared at Alara as she sat across from him, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. She had spoken of duty, of political necessity, but there was something in her eyes that told him there was more to this story than she was letting on. He had no desire to force her to talk about things she wasn't ready to share, but the tension between them was thick, and neither of them could pretend that everything was normal. He crossed the room, moving to stand near the window. Outside, the city stretched out beneath them, its towering buildings glowing softly in the fading light of the setting sun. It looked peaceful from here, almost serene, but Liam knew better. This place was a palace, a symbol of power, and with power came secrets. He had already seen that. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked quietly, his back still turned to her. "Why drag me into this if it was all a lie from the start?" Alara didn't respond immediately. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the palace's advanced technology. She stood up slowly, walking to the other side of the room where a small table held a collection of alien artifacts, strange, glowing objects that Liam couldn't identify. Her fingers brushed lightly over one of them, but she didn't pick it up. "I didn't know how," she finally said, her voice soft and careful. "How could I explain this? This marriage, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to marry someone else, someone from an allied kingdom, someone who could offer true peace for my people." Liam turned around, his curiosity piqued. "But you didn't want that?" "No," Alara said with a slight shake of her head, her lips tightening in a bitter smile. "I didn't want that, but I also didn't want this, to be used as a pawn in a political game. But that's what I am, that's what I've always been." Liam frowned. He could see the struggle in her, her conflict, her sense of duty, but also the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. She wasn't just a princess. She was a young woman trapped in a world of political manipulation. He knew what it was like to be caught in a situation you didn't control. It was suffocating. "And what about me?" Liam's voice was low. "I didn't sign up for this either. I'm just a soldier, and now I'm supposed to be the groom to a princess I don't know in a kingdom I don't belong to." Alara looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the ceremony. She took a step toward him, and he could see the vulnerability in her gaze. "You're not just anyone," she said quietly. "I didn't choose you, but somehow fate did. We're both caught in something bigger than ourselves." Liam's heart raced as he looked at her. Her words were no comfort, but they were honest. He had felt it too, the sense that they were both pawns, swept up in a game they didn't fully understand. "I don't get it," Liam muttered, shaking his head. "Why would your family choose me? I'm nobody to them." Alara's gaze shifted away from him, her eyes focusing on something distant. "It's not about you, Liam. It's about what you represent." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "The Elandrian people are divided. There are factions who want to overthrow the monarchy, who believe the royal bloodline is weak. And then there are those who want to keep things as they are, those who want peace above all else. My marriage was supposed to be the key to securing that peace." Liam remained silent, letting her words sink in. "But you didn't love the man you were supposed to marry." "No," she said, her voice heavy. "I didn't love him, I don't even know him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the alliance, the stability it would bring to my people. My marriage was to be the symbol of that stability." Liam turned back to the window, staring out at the sprawling city below. There was a part of him that wanted to argue, to say something that would make this all seem more just, more reasonable. But he knew it was futile. Alara had no choice in the matter, and now neither did he. "There's more, isn't there?" Liam asked quietly, his eyes scanning the cityscape. "You're not just worried about a political marriage, you're worried about something else." Alara's shoulders slumped, and she sighed, walking over to the table and picking up one of the strange, glowing objects. She turned it over in her hands as if it were a comfort to her. "There's a conspiracy brewing within my own court," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about peace. Some people want to use this marriage to their advantage. They want to see me fail. They want to take control of the throne." Liam turned back around, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean? Who's behind this?" Alara's eyes met his, filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "I don't know yet. But I've started to uncover some things, whispers in the shadows, secret meetings, things that don't add up. There are people in my court who don't want me to rule, and they'll do anything to stop me, even if it means using me to start a war." Liam's blood ran cold. This was bigger than anything he had expected. The politics of this world were complex, but the stakes had just gotten much higher. Alara wasn't just a princess trapped in a marriage she didn't want, she was a target, and he was caught in the crossfire. "Why haven't you told anyone else?" Liam asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. "I've tried," she said, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. "But the people I trust are few, and even they might be compromised. This palace is filled with spies, and every move I make is watched. I can't afford to trust anyone unless I'm absolutely sure." Liam could feel the weight of her words. There was no simple solution here. He wasn't just a soldier who had stumbled into an unwanted wedding. He was a part of something much larger now. He had a responsibility to Alara, to her people, and to himself. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know what I can do, but I'll help you figure this out." Alara looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't have to do this. You didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Liam replied, "but I'm in this now whether I like it or not. And I can't just stand by while people are trying to tear this place apart." There was a long pause, and for a moment neither of them spoke. But then Alara nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly as if a burden had been lifted, even if just a little. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We'll need each other if we're going to survive this." Liam met her gaze, feeling something shift between them. It wasn't just duty anymore, it was something more. They were in this together, whether it was by chance or by fate. And as the weight of the situation settled on his shoulders, Liam knew that their story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The tension in the air was thick, and the silence between them seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Liam and Alara had only just started to come to terms with the magnitude of the political storm they were caught in. But now, as they stood in her private chamber, the quiet was shattered by the sudden sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. The palace was never this quiet, and the fact that they were alone in this room now felt like a sign. Liam's instincts kicked in immediately. He moved swiftly, his body reacting to the sound before his mind could fully process it. He glanced at Alara, who had gone pale, her eyes wide with alarm. She had heard it too. "Something's wrong," Alara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know who it is, but we need to move. Now." Liam nodded without a word, already taking action. He knew that the people in this palace were watching them. Every conversation, every gesture could be under scrutiny. But there was no time to waste. He moved to the door and pressed his ear to it. He could hear voices now, low and urgent. The guards were coming. Someone had learned of their meeting. Alara stepped back, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to get out of here. I don't know who's loyal to me anymore, Liam. The traitors are everywhere." Liam looked back at her, his mind racing. "Where do we go?" "There's a hidden passage in the west wing of the palace. It leads to the lower levels. From there, we can slip out unnoticed." Liam's heart began to pound. Every part of him told him to stay and fight, but this wasn't the time. They were outnumbered, and without knowing who to trust, they couldn't risk being captured. They had to leave, and they had to do it quickly. Without a moment's hesitation, they moved together through the dimly lit corridors, staying low and silent. The palace, once so grand and awe-inspiring, now felt like a labyrinth of danger. They avoided the main hallways, slipping through the side passages where the shadows hid them from view. Each step felt heavier than the last, each creak of the floorboards like a warning. Alara led the way, her steps light despite the chaos unfolding around them. She had grown up in this palace, and though it had once been her home, it now felt more like a prison. Liam followed close behind her, every muscle tensed. He could hear voices growing louder, but the passage was just ahead. If they could make it there, they might still have a chance. They reached the hidden door without incident. Alara pressed a panel on the wall, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. It was an old secret, one that had been kept from the public eye for centuries. Once inside, the passage closed behind them, and the only sound was the distant thrum of the palace's machinery. For a moment they stood there, catching their breath. Liam turned to Alara, his expression grim. "What now?" he asked. "We need to find allies," she said quietly. "People we can trust. I have a few in mind, but we don't have much time. The longer we stay here, the more likely we are to be found." Liam nodded. "Lead the way." They moved through the narrow passage, which twisted and turned beneath the palace. The air was cooler here, damp with age. The walls were made of ancient stone, and the only light came from the occasional flicker of the energy sources embedded in the walls. The deeper they went, the more Liam realized how little he understood about the world Alara had come from. This hidden underworld of the palace was a far cry from the sterile, organized structure he was used to in the military. It was like a whole new universe was unfolding before him. Eventually, they reached a small door at the end of the passage. Alara stopped and turned to Liam. "This is it." One of the few places in the palace where the traitors won't think to look, she said softly. Her fingers lingered on the door's handle for a moment, and then she pushed it open. They emerged into what looked like a small, forgotten room. It was filled with old tapestries and mismatched furniture, and a faint smell of dust hung in the air. But what caught Liam's attention was the person sitting at the far end of the room. A woman, dressed in plain clothing, sat at a small desk, her eyes scanning a series of documents. Her appearance was striking, with sharp features and short, dark hair. She looked up when they entered, and her expression softened when she saw Alara. "Your Highness," the woman said, rising to her feet. "I feared you might need help." Alara nodded gravely. "You were right, Alara, we've been compromised." Liam's eyes narrowed. "Alara. Do you trust her?" Alara met his gaze. "Yes, she's one of the few I can trust completely." Liam wasn't sure what to make of it. In a world full of hidden agendas and secret plots, trusting anyone was a risk. But he had no choice but to take Alara's word for it. He needed allies if they were going to make it through this. Alara quickly moved to a nearby cabinet and pulled out a few weapons, laying them out on the table. "You'll need these if you're going to survive what's coming," she said, her voice steady. Liam's eyes flicked to the weapons, and he picked up a sleek alien blaster. It was lighter than what he was used to, but it felt powerful in his hands. The design was unfamiliar, but he knew how to use it. "What's the plan?" he asked, glancing between the two women. Alara exhaled deeply, clearly weighing her next words. "The traitors in the palace want me dead, but they won't stop there. They plan to take control of the throne, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. We need to expose them before they make their move. I have some loyal supporters outside the palace who can help, but it's too risky to go directly to them." "Then what?" Liam asked, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. "We strike at the heart of the conspiracy," Alara said, her voice firm. "We gather the evidence, confront the conspirators, and end this before it spirals out of control." Liam felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The fight was no longer a matter of surviving. It was about taking control of their own fate. "We'll do it together," Liam said, his voice steady. He could see the resolve in Alara's eyes, and it strengthened his own. Alara nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Together!" The darkness of the hidden chambers felt more oppressive than ever. The plan was set, and everything hinged on one critical move: getting the evidence of the conspiracy and exposing the traitors before they could strike. Alara's eyes were sharp, her face set in determination. She knew the palace better than anyone, and now it was time to use that knowledge to their advantage. Liam stood beside her, his hand resting on the handle of the blaster. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting, but he knew this was no ordinary fight. This was about survival, not just for him, but for Alara and her people. "This is it," Alara said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension. "Once we leave this room, there's no going back." Liam nodded. "I'm with you. We finish this together." Alara, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward, holding a small data pad. "I've arranged for the evidence to be delivered to the main control room. Once it's there, the conspirators will have no choice but to reveal themselves, but we'll need to move quickly." Alara took the datapad from her, glancing at the screen. The data was vital, information about the traitors' plans, their secret meetings, and the soldiers they had enlisted to carry out their schemes. It was the key to exposing the truth and stopping them before they could take control of the throne. "Where do we go now?" Liam asked, his voice low. He was already anticipating the next steps, his mind sharp and focused. "There's a hidden passage that leads directly to the control room," Alara said. "It's well guarded, but if we move quietly, we should be able to slip past the guards. Once we're inside, we send the data to the public broadcast. The whole palace will know who's been plotting against us." Liam gave her a nod of approval. The plan was risky, but it was the only way. They couldn't afford to fail. As they moved through the corridors, their footsteps muffled by the soft carpet beneath them, the palace seemed eerily quiet. The usual hum of activity was absent. No servants, no guards patrolling the halls. It was almost as if the palace itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Alara led them through a maze of narrow passages, her familiarity with the palace guiding their way. They passed a few guards along the way, but they moved quickly, slipping into shadows when necessary and avoiding detection. The further they went, the more Liam's senses sharpened. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but there was no time to second-guess it. They had a job to do. When they reached the entrance to the control room, they paused. It was heavily guarded, just as Alara had predicted. Two soldiers stood at the door, weapons ready, their faces stern. But they didn't seem to notice the three of them approach, as if they were blind to their presence. Alara whispered a few words in a language Liam didn't understand, and before he could react, she pulled out a small device from her pocket. She activated it, and the soldiers froze, their eyes glazing over. The device was a simple mind-altering tool, nothing lethal, but enough to disorient and incapacitate them temporarily. With their guards down, Alara quickly moved to the door, unlocking it with ease. The room beyond was filled with screens, each one displaying information from various parts of the palace. The control center was the heart of the palace's security systems, and it was here that the conspirators had been orchestrating their plans. Liam's eyes scanned the room, noting the intricate security systems in place, but it didn't matter now. They were already inside. Alara stepped forward, her fingers flying over the console as she connected the datapad to the system. "This will only take a moment," she murmured, her eyes focused on the screen. Liam kept watch, his hand still on his blaster, his senses alert. Time was running out. He could feel the pressure building, the clock ticking down as they waited for the data to upload. If they failed, there would be no turning back. The conspirators would take the throne, and the galaxy would fall into chaos. Finally, the screen flashed, and a message appeared on the console. It was the evidence they needed. Names, dates, secret meetings, all of it laid bare for the world to see. Alara smiled, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "We've done it," she said quietly. But before they could celebrate, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. More guards were coming. The plan had worked, but it had also triggered a response. The conspirators would know now that their plot had been exposed. They would come for Alara, and they would come for Liam too. "We have to go," Liam said urgently. "Now," Alara nodded, her face hardening with resolve. She grabbed the datapad from the console and stuffed it into her pocket. The three of them quickly exited the control room, slipping back into the maze of hallways. But this time, there were no shadows to hide in. The palace was alive with movement. Soldiers rushed toward them from every direction, and the air was thick with tension. They were surrounded. Liam and Alara exchanged a look. There was no escape. They would have to fight their way out. "Stay close," Liam said, his voice steady. "I'll cover you." They moved quickly, using the elements of surprise to their advantage. Liam fired first, taking down a guard who had just rounded a corner. The shot rang out, echoing through the halls. More guards appeared, but Liam was already in motion, ducking behind a pillar and taking cover. Alara was no slouch either. She moved with precision, her training as a princess paying off as she ducked and weaved, firing at the guards with quick, calculated shots. Her movements were fluid, and for the first time, Liam saw the warrior within her. She wasn't just a princess trapped in a political game. She was a fighter, ready to protect her kingdom. As they made their way toward the palace's main exit, the hallway ahead seemed to close in on them. More soldiers appeared, their weapons drawn. There was no time to think, only to act. Liam and Alara moved as one, taking down their enemies with skill and determination. But for every soldier they knocked down, two more seemed to take their place. Liam's breath came faster now, the adrenaline coursing through him. He could feel the heat of battle in his veins, but there was something more important than just survival now. Alara was counting on him. They both were. Finally, they reached the main entrance of the palace, and Liam pushed open the massive doors. The cool night air hit them like a wave, the sounds of battle echoing in the distance. But they weren't safe yet. "We're almost there," Alara said, her voice strained but determined. Liam turned back to look at her, his eyes locking with hers. There was no fear in her gaze, only resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her people, for the future of her kingdom. The two of them ran, pushing through the final stretch of the palace's outer courtyard. A ship was waiting for them in the distance, its engines already humming with power. They made it to the ship just as the first wave of soldiers reached the entrance. The doors closed behind them, sealing them off from the palace. They were free. As the ship lifted off, Liam looked out the window, his heart still racing from the chaos. They had done it. The conspirators had been exposed, and the future of the galaxy had shifted in their favor. But as they ascended into the sky, Liam knew this was only the beginning. The battle had been won, but there were more challenges ahead. The conspirators wouldn't rest, and neither would he. But for the first time, Liam felt a sense of purpose. They were in this together, and they would fight for as long as it took. Alara turned to him, her expression softer now, the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you, Liam," she said quietly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Liam met her gaze, his own expression firm. "We're in this together, always." And with that, the ship soared into the stars, carrying them toward an uncertain future, but a future they would face side by side.